There we are. There, it's in progress. Just to make sure that everyone's okay with that. Here's John Mason. John, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something
Yes,
before we
convener.
go?
I'm happy that it's recorded, but normally we publish minutes from these meetings, and I think it does make a slight difference to the people who are attending what they can say if they think the whole thing is going to be published. So I raise it as a question. Is it really a good idea to publish the whole video online?
Yes, John. I think you raise. I think that's a valid point because I did notice that after the last meeting, there were sort of a couple of press reports based on the video, and given that we had Transport Scotland officials with us, I don't know if they were comfortable with that. So I just want to make sure that everyone is okay with that approach, particularly our speaker today. So if you can let me know at the end, we don't have to publish the full video, but as long as everyone's comfortable with that, then we can go with that. Colin, you want to come in? You're on mute, Colin.
Yeah, just to say sorry, I had a conversation with Heather Cowan afterwards. She said she was comfortable with everything that she said at that meeting.
Okay.
Just for information.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I just want to make sure that, as long as everyone taking part is okay with that, then I think it's okay. But if anyone has any doubts, just let us know. You can let us know either at the end or afterwards. So with that, very important point, we'll move on to our speaker today, who is Richard Riley from Element Energy Consultancy. Richard, you might want to just say a little bit about yourself, but Richard's going to talk about the role of demand management in meeting Scotland's 20% car traffic reduction target. I think he's got a few slides, but Richard, over to you if you just want to introduce yourself and then get into the slides.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for having me here to speak today. I'm Richard Riley. I'm Senior Principal Consultant at Element Energy. I co-lead our work on transport decarbonisation, and I was the main project manager and analyst for the work done for Transport Scotland, looking at the total emissions pathway for transport in Scotland, which led to the suggestion of the 20% car kilometre reductions. So I think I just need to be added as the presenter to share my screen.
I think you should be a co-host, so it should work, but I can make you a host if that's not working.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Hopefully everyone can see that. Great.
Yes.
So for those who haven't come across us before, Element Energy is a low carbon consultancy, been running since 2003, based in the UK. We are exclusively focused on projects and work on decarbonisation and the pathway to net zero. And as you can see there at the bottom, we work across the entire economy looking at decarbonisation. And that really helps us to give the big picture about how every sector will decarbonise, but also the links between the sectors. So I know that Transport Scotland presented some of our results and some of the kind of follow-on work that they have done from that at the last meeting. From that work, I know that Heather was very kind of clear on this point, but I just want to reiterate what our work shows is that if you are going to deliver emission reductions by 2030 that are in line with the scientific evidence on what is needed to limit the worst effects of climate change, then a combination of technology and behavior change is needed. And what we show here is our kind of most ambitious expectations of what technology can deliver in the UK by 2030. And the red chunk on the right-hand side is the gap that we see that is left. And so in all scenarios that we're doing, we always see this combination of technology and behavior change needed in order to meet our climate targets. This comes through in all of our work. You'll have seen some of the results that we did for Scotland in the last meeting. Here's another example of a piece that we did for Greater London Authority, the GLA. We looked at a kind of wide range of scenarios for reducing emissions across London. And in every single scenario, apart from the kind of baseline scenario, we see really, really very significant changes in behavior and the use of cars, with a big shift away from car use towards public transport, active travel. You may have seen that from this work, the Mayor of London has announced that they will target what we call our accelerated green scenario. So they are now targeting a 27% reduction in car kilometres over the next 8 years. So there is now a growing body of evidence and a growing number of regions that are beginning to set these types of targets. But good demand reduction management is about far more than just reducing car kilometres. Good policy should deliver across all of these 5 areas: emissions reduction, congestion reduction, improvement in people's health, improvement in community cohesion, and improvement in transport equity. And so some examples of this, for example, in the first case, reducing emissions, any policy in demand management will to reduce emissions by just having less car kilometres, but good policy should also favour battery electric vehicles, so should be delivering both of those aims together. Similarly for reduced congestion, obviously reducing car kilometres will reduce congestion, but a very good piece of policy that is more than just a kind of a flat rate cost should be able to shift demand away from peak times and reduce congestion further. So we see in each of these cases that a kind of very simple, basic policy design can deliver against some of these points, but there is clearly a way to improve that and deliver greater benefit across all of these. What we see as kind of the bottom half of the table here is the less kind of talked about benefits, but actually in terms of economic value, improved health can be one of the strongest economic reasons for a shift away from car use. And we see today that the current transport system doesn't work for everybody. There's a significant number of people across the UK, especially those in low-income households who don't have car access. And so shifting the political agenda away from subsidising the car through policy and planning towards much greater support for a wider range of modes can really help support transport equity and help these groups improve their access. We really see this piece of policy as being very challenging, but also delivering a really very broad range of benefits. So demand management, I guess, can be split into kind of 2 pieces. There's taxation that increases the price of car use, but management of car use can also be done through planning and impacts on space allocation. Today, we've been asked to just focus on the kind of price control part of the picture. You can see here, we've kind of split the policy up into 3 areas: the taxation on fuel, which is what we've got today, taxation at point of use, so road user charging, or taxation on additional car benefits such as parking. By moving away from a taxation on fuel to the others, we do have the potential to impact a wider range of areas. So it brings up the opportunity to impact congestion, improve health. So we get a kind of opportunity for a broader range of benefits. The downside is that the taxation on fuel is very simple to implement. And the other options are clearly much more challenging to implement. In some cases, they require, personal data. They're challenging to deliver and to get buy-in from the general population. But clearly, if we're going to move away from petrol and diesel vehicles towards battery electric vehicles, a different taxation system is definitely necessary. And we kind of see this as probably being a combination of the 2 systems on the right. So there is likely to be some road user charging. It's certainly been mentioned by Treasury and looks more and more likely in the discussions we see across the UK. But as we'll show in a minute, there is a very broad range of policies under that heading. A very simple kind of per kilometre charge delivers very few of the additional benefits around health, around congestion, etc. A much more complicated policy can deliver on those benefits, but obviously has the side effect that it will take longer to deliver and much more expensive to deliver. This graph shows the proportion of people's disposable income they currently spend on car use. And it's by income decile, so low income on the left through to high income on the right. I just wanted to point out kind of 2 key trends here. Firstly, clearly the lowest income groups in society spend a hugely larger proportion of their disposable income on transport, on car use. And also you can see in the bubbles at the bottom that high income groups travel 2 to 3 times further by car than the lowest income groups. And what this really tells us is that a flat rate taxation policy, such as the current vehicle exercise duty, is likely never going to be sufficient to bring down car demand, because you simply cannot set it at a high enough rate to significantly impact the behavior of the highest income groups without having an enormous impact, an unacceptable impact on the lowest income groups. So the biggest challenge in terms of delivering fiscal demand management policy that actually reduces the demand of the highest income groups who drive the furthest is the fact that if you put the policy blanket across everyone in the population, you either set it at a low enough level for it to be acceptable, in which case it won't have the desired outcome, or you set it at a high enough level to have the desired outcome, and it will be hugely unpopular and very unfair. And that is really what we see as the greatest challenge in terms of delivering policy in this area. Here we've just got an example of 3 different designs that we've looked at for a road pricing scheme. On the left, a fixed rate tariff. In the middle, a variable tariff, so varying by time of day and place. And on the right, a variable tariff with a rebate for the lowest income groups. What we see is that because the road pricing scheme is an additional cost, that the cost for everyone in society goes up, and that therefore transport inequality goes up, because a fixed rate across everyone in society will naturally impact the people on the lowest income the hardest. This picture begins to significantly change when we look at petrol or diesel vehicles versus battery electric vehicles. So battery electric vehicles have a higher purchase price than a petrol or diesel vehicle, but much lower running costs. And so they benefit second and third hand car owners, in that the first hand owner pays off a significant proportion of the purchase price, and then second and third hand owners can benefit from the much lower running costs. So battery electric vehicle naturally has much flatter distribution of expenditure as a proportion of income. And so once we have a fleet of battery electric vehicles being used across Scotland, you can see how relatively high taxation system could be used to impact demand. What we see as the real challenge is the interim period. So how do we transition from where we are today to where we want to be with a purely battery electric fleet? And in that interim period, we see an enormous risk where higher income groups can move over to battery electric vehicles first because they are likely to buy new vehicles. They then benefit from the lower running costs. We then see the lowest income groups in society stuck with the most polluting vehicles throughout to the latest point in the timeline. And so any demand management policy is likely to doubly impact them because they're stuck with the most polluting vehicles and they've got the demand management costs on top. And it's really managing this transition, this next kind of 10 to 15 years, that is the challenge in terms of hitting demand while ensuring transport equity. Finally, just to show a couple of examples. So there are several cities pushing forward with demand management policies, and we see two different sides of the picture here. On the left, London pushing ahead with a 27% reduction in VKT, with initial discussions focusing around road user charging. On the right, we've got Paris, which instead is focusing on policies that aren't cost-based, they're about space, and so it's about restricting car access to certain parts of the city. Thank you very much. That was a pretty broad area to cover, but hopefully an interesting starting point for discussion. Does anyone have any questions?
Can we get rid of the slide?
Yeah.
I'm still seeing that, so that's still on my screen.
Sorry, I'm just looking for the option to stop sharing.
Okay.
It's back down at the share screen option.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got the share screen option, but I'm not.
Well, you can. I'll tell you what. I mean, I'm seeing a very, very small screen here with some hands up. You can be trying to find the solution to that. and I'll call some people. I'm going to ask you first, though, why are we trying to reduce car kilometres? That's better, and not car miles, because it seems to me if you set a target, let's say 20% reduction in car kilometres, that's easier to achieve than a 20% reduction in car miles, which is actually what we use. So why have we gone for kilometres? Is it because it's easier?
No, so this is, I guess, purely a mathematical point in meters and kilometers is the standard units for our scientific modeling, and so that is kind of carried through. You can similarly make the same argument around miles, if that is a metric that is easier for the general public to understand.
I just make the point because we use miles in this. We travel in miles and not in this country, and not kilometres. However, I'll leave that there because there are a number of hands up. I will take in the order that I see them on my screen. Stuart Hay, followed by Ralph Roberts, and I'll take you both, and then I'll come on to the rest. So Stuart first.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting presentation. It's a question about equity, and the poorest in society don't actually own cars. And the challenge is there's some people that are forced to own cars because of the lack of alternatives, and how that factors into the model. Does this just assume that you need a car to do things? But if we have extra funding from these sources, could we put on extra public transport, other options, so you don't need to own a car? And is that not the most equitable way for some people in terms of reducing their net transport costs?
Yeah, really good point to bring up. So totally agree. Any fiscal policy that's designed to reduce car demand should clearly be very thought through in terms of the local impact and whether alternatives exist for those trips. So, we have suggested to Transport Scotland through our report that we would see it very important that bus, walking and cycling infrastructure is there ahead of these fiscal policies so that an alternative is in place. We also expect these policies to be very different between different locations. So we know there are some rural areas where car ownership is very strongly locked in. And so if you had, for example, a road pricing scheme, the worst possible option would just be to have a flat rate everywhere. We would expect to have a higher rate in urban areas where alternative modes exist, a much lower rate in rural areas where no alternative exists.
Okay, that's great. A good number of hands up. Ralph, you'll need to unmute, Ralph.
I managed to mute myself instead of unmute. Apologies. One observation, one question, please, if you don't mind. First observation was that you listed battery electric, pushing people towards battery electric with their private cars. I'd suggest we should call that zero emission vehicles, because very quickly hydrogen is going to play a part in that, and other technologies, indeed converting internal combustion over to hydrogen as that gains momentum over the next couple of years. That was just an observation. The question I've got in terms of the running costs, it's clear that, if you're the further down the socioeconomic ladder you are, the older your vehicle tends to be. And with battery electric vehicles, the higher the running costs are with older battery electric vehicles. You also get less mileage out of a charge because of the degradation of the battery, and the replacement costs of a battery render the vehicle uneconomic to use. So the lifespan of a battery electric vehicle, as we know it right now, is much shorter than it is for an internal combustion engine vehicle. 15 years would be common in a petrol or diesel car. But if you look at the electric vehicles in the market, cars particularly, they're becoming unusable at 7 years on. So there needs to be a big change in the technology, and that isn't clear that it's going to happen just yet. So the graph doesn't show that. People lower down the socioeconomic ladder are going to be punished by this.
Yeah, so I think if we think about the timeline that we're talking about for the 20% reduction in car miles, so we're looking at 2030 as the target for that. Clearly, at that point, there will be a significant number of higher income groups who will have bought a battery electric or hydrogen vehicle by 2030. There'll be a relatively or very small number of lower income groups who will have bought a second-hand zero emission vehicle by 2030. So we will have quite a polarized set of groups, with high income almost exclusively having shifted over to low emission vehicles, lower income almost exclusively being on the higher polluting petrol and diesel vehicles that, you know, will have been bought in the next 2 or 3 years. And so that is the real challenge of the policy, is to deliver demand reduction across both groups, but predominantly from the higher income group, while not delivering the cost increase for the most polluting, or for the group using the most polluting vehicles. But clearly we still have kind of climate targets to meet. And so there will need to be some cost controls over the use of those most polluting vehicles. And so it's a very, very complicated set of different dynamics across society. And policy needs to be very, very carefully designed to account for that. And our concern is at the moment that the discussions we've seen around Treasury is for a preference for a much simpler system that's easy to implement. And we don't see that as a good option reflecting the real challenges we'll see in society through the transition.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'll come to Alison Cosgrove next. When anyone asks a question, if you could say who you are, what your organisation is, because we won't necessarily know, and it helps for the minute. So I'll go to Alison next.
Thanks, Convener. Alison Cosgrove, Real Future. I'm afraid I haven't quite worked out how to put that in my signature yet. My question is whether Transport Scotland have taken any view on this yet, because I do notice that your examples were in London and in Paris. Now, while I could see the whole road pricing issue perhaps being effective in Glasgow or in Edinburgh, I can hardly see it being effective in Inverness or Stirling, where you've got a smallish city and a huge rural hinterland. I just wondered if you'd given any thought to that.
Yes, I mean, we set out the different technological challenges for Transport Scotland, and Transport Scotland have been working on the policy implications of our findings. So we haven't directly worked with Transport Scotland on the policy, and they would have to comment on how they see that working. I guess the real challenge from Scotland's perspective is that this policy is likely to be set in Westminster, and that policy design will potentially be focused around what perhaps works in London, and clearly that doesn't work in other parts of the UK anywhere near so well. And so it's really important that at this point in time, while those policies are being designed, that a very wide range of views and issues are brought up and debated.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I mean, I think that's a key point, that if we were to go down the road pricing route, it has to work across the UK, because clearly people are travelling across the UK. I mean, before I come to the next question, I've got a sort of technical question: is how would it actually work? I mean, are we relying on cameras to read number plates?
Yeah, so this really comes down to the kind of complexity point. If for a very, very simple system that was just based on how many kilometers you drive with a flat rate per kilometer, you could just rely on the fact that the odometer on the car is read annually at an MOT, and you could just log people's annual mileage. For a much more complex system that is able to change the price depending on the time of day, whether it's urban or rural setting, the kind of situation of the driver, then clearly a much more complex system is needed. The examples we see of this in other parts of the world, they use GPS tracking. So a GPS device tracks the car and logs how many kilometers the car travels on urban roads versus rural roads at peak times or non-peak times, and basically just produces a summary and says the car has spent 20% of its time on urban roads at peak times, charged at X pence per kilometer. And that set of summary statistics would have to be sent to a government department, I guess DFT, who would have to collate and charge for the data. So it's clearly quite a significant computer system required to run such a system, and obviously potentially quite a lot of feedback from the general public about the type of tracking that would need to be used and how they feel about that tracking.
Yeah, which is a whole different argument. Right, we've got, I think, 8 people want in before 2:00. So JA's iPad, introduce yourself again. I know you did last meeting.
Yes, Jane Ann Liston, Starlink campaign, also a Fife councillor. First of all, you don't need to worry about whether it's 20% of kilometres or miles. It's exactly the same. You're reducing it by a fifth. That's what we're saying. We have to reduce road mileage distance by a fifth. So we can measure it in leagues, we can measure it in versts, or anything we fancy. So you don't need to worry about that. But I use miles too. Secondly, you said something about people who are the least well off. They're not only stuck with the cars that are the most polluting, but they're less likely to, they'll say that they can't afford the bus fare or something like that. And therefore it's cheaper for them to drive to work. And that is crazy, but that is something that's got to be offset. Someone said something about you can't have the same flat rates, and I think it has to be, if you were going to do workplace car parking, then that has got to be tailored to the location, what public transport options are available, and that sort of thing. For example, when I'm in Fife House, I haven't been there for 2 years now, but there's all these cars parking free of charge all the way around Fife House, and the bus station is 5 minutes walk away. The railway station's 2.5 miles, but the nearest bus station is 5 minutes walk. And yet there are buses going all over Fife. People are still driving cars because they'll say, well, it's cheaper. It's daft for me to pay a bus fare. So that is the sort of balancing act that's got to be done. It is crazy that it is cheaper to drive a car to work when there's an alternative public transport option, and that is what has to be dealt with. That, of course, is why we have computers. They do all these complicated calculations for us, and we don't have to worry about it. We just have to make sure the thing runs properly. But I think that's all got to be borne in mind. Also, the fact that commuting has over the years got longer.
Jane, can I just stop you there? You are going on a bit, and I don't wish to be rude, but there are quite a few other people want in. Can we sort of end it there? And Richard, you might want to respond to what Jane said.
Yes, so I completely agree. We're covering one kind of niche part of a much bigger picture. There's clearly to deliver the 20% car kilometre reductions, you need a very integrated approach across delivering alternatives, disincentivizing car use, and disincentivizing car use in a way that reflects place. So the pricing needs to reflect what alternatives, what options there are for each place. And so it will be a complicated system to deliver.
Okay. Morven Brooks, you're next.
Hi there, yes, I'm Morven Brooks and I'm the CEO of Disability Equality Scotland. So I'm representing the views and opinions of disabled people who are our members. We just published a weekly poll report yesterday asking the views of our members whether they feel that the 20% reduction in kilometres of car travel was achievable. There was a significant response to this weekly poll where over 365 respondents stated no, they don't think this is an achievable target, mainly due to the accessibility, the availability of accessible public transport, also the affordability and reliability of public transport came out in the response. Another area which kind of linked in with what Jane was just talking about, our infrastructure to bus stops or stations or public transport hubs. Our infrastructure is not accessible enough. Again, we're still hearing of issues of the lack of dropped curbs, for example, or street clutter taking up space, which really does impact disabled people, the mobility getting to a bus stop, for example. So their accessible cars or the cars that they have are their means of getting to from A to B, for example. And it's that alternative. It's difficult for them to look at that alternative if it's an affordability issue with looking at a hybrid or electric car. Also looking at the option of digital connectivity with using travel as well. Not everybody is digitally connected to look at booking public transport, for example. So I'll stop there, but what I'll do is I'll put the link to the survey in the chat and you could got access to the full report.
That's great. Thanks very much. Richard, do you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think incredibly important point to bring up. And I think it really links in with the kind of commentary I was making around how the policy is designed to direct the cost towards those who are able to change their behaviour. And that the complexity of the policy is really, really necessary in order to have an effective policy.
Okay, I'm going to go to Stephen Stewart next.
Thanks very much. Stephen Stewart, Director of Communications with Stagecoach Group. The point I wanted to raise was about real world impacts of public investment and these sort of individual transport choices beyond just transport, because I think quite often when we talk about transport, we get into this bubble about what is this going to mean for transport costs, what's this going to mean for transport benefits. But we all know that, for example, in terms of public transport, there are wider economic and social benefits around about investing in that. So what the question was, whether or not the modelling work that you've done, you're able to quantify the sort of wider society benefits that you get for every single pound we invest, whether that's a pound that goes towards subsidising EVs in terms of cars versus what you would get for a pound investing in public transport, and what that would mean in terms of health outputs, social equity, safety, air quality, carbon. Because I think if we're trying to influence people's behaviour, it's very difficult for people, I think, at the moment to see, if I make this choice, what's it going to do for the country and what's it going to do for me?
Yeah, brilliant question. So that was not part of the piece of work we did for Transport Scotland. It is aligned with a number of pieces of work we're looking to do this year, to really kind of define that economic value to the whole economy from the modal shift. And clearly, given that an electric car just reduces CO2 emissions and some air quality, whereas a modal shift has that much broader range of benefits, as you discussed, there's no question that a pound spent in that modal shift has a much bigger economy-wide benefit than just changing technology. And we completely agree. We think this is, a key piece that's missing from the literature, from the discussions that government is having.
So you say you're doing some work on that this year. Who are you doing that for?
I can't say at the moment. It's kind of in the pipeline, but as soon as there's any movement on that, I'm happy to share.
Well, if I can be cheeky and ask, is it UK wide, or is it just Scotland, or something else?
So that's UK wide, with a breakdown per nation.
Okay, that's really good to know. Right, I'm going to go to Vic McKinley, who I don't know. So Vic, say who you are.
No, thanks for calling me. I'm from Light Rail Transit Association, LRTA, and our mission is to promote the use of trams. I'd like to summarize a lot of the previous speakers' views, in that we have seen a lot of stick, but no carrot. There's a lot of prevention of car use, but no provision for public transport. The other thing that is brought out, and I found missing both today and on the previous meeting, was the Oslo effect, which is non-tailpipe emissions. These are far more toxic than CO2 and carbon emissions. And they are actually worse from heavier vehicles, and electric vehicles tend to be heavier than fossil fuels. Has any thought been given to that, or to any of these aspects?
Yes, so clearly electric vehicles still have air pollution from tires and brakes, and so while they improve air quality, they don't improve air quality as much as modal shift does. And so yeah, we clearly point that out in some of our analysis. On the carrot and stick issue, we totally agree. Again, I guess the major challenge we see is just the distribution of funding. At the moment, total UK policy funding towards cars and roads far exceeds spending on active travel or public transport infrastructure. And while that kind of continues, it's very difficult to see how public transport options will be good enough to take on a significant proportion of car kilometres or car miles. So that is clearly another piece of the puzzle that needs to change.
Okay, and have you done any research into what's the most effective type of public transport for getting people to switch modes? I mean, is it buses, is it trains, or trams, stroke light rail? No, that's a question for Richard.
Because there is an answer for
that. No, I mean, we really see a requirement for a combination of all the different modes to be supported, given that across different income levels and different places, we see very different reliance on bus or coach versus rail. So our kind of policy packages tend to provide support across all of those. We haven't done an analysis of particularly favouring one over another.
Okay, very quickly, Vic, I know you wanted to say something on that. But if you unmute.
Several researchers have found that if you provide a bus or a tram as an alternative to car users, there's a 30% increase in shift to tram compared with a shift to bus. Now, obviously, you would say, well, I would say that, wouldn't I, as a tram promoter? But this has been found worldwide. So that would give you your answer of comparison.
Okay. Well, Vic, if you can share some of that research with us, that'd be great. I'm going to go to Dave Defoe.
Thanks very much. A quick comment and a question. I put in the chat. You
need to say where you're from, Dave. I think
sorry, it's from Spokes, the Lothian Cycle Campaign. I put comments in the chat about a public meeting which we held the other day with the Minister, Patrick Harvey, and he was talking about the Scottish Government's route map to meeting the 20% traffic reduction. And he was challenged during the meeting on the fact that the routes map only comes up with a demand management framework by the year 2025. And his reply to that was that the Scottish Government is in fact working with local authorities already on demand management measures that can come in earlier. So I just find that very interesting. I don't know that he didn't go into details, but it's maybe something worth following up. My question, Richard, you didn't mention the workplace parking levy at all, and it's been on the go in Nottingham for a good number of years, and it's now being built into several other local authority transport policies, including Oxford and some of the London boroughs. We've now got the powers coming in Scotland at last, and there's been, in my opinion, a lot of misinformation about that in the lead up to the forthcoming local elections. Could you say to what extent you think the Nottingham and England experience is relevant to Scotland, or do you think there are big differences, which means that we can't really learn anything from Nottingham? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I didn't touch on that, I guess, just because of limited time. It's a really good example. I think there's a lot to learn from the experience in the UK. It can be a very effective measure, and clearly has the benefit that it is locally controlled. It's one of the kind of few demand management policy areas that is locally controlled. And so from that perspective, it is a very useful measure. I guess flip side of that is that actually the vast majority of car kilometres are for leisure activities. And post-COVID, with a decline in commuting, that trend is only likely to continue. So while impacting the commute is very important in that it changes people's habits, and that those habits have a broad impact across the way they choose to travel every day, it is the slightly less frequent leisure activities, especially in those high income groups, that make up a hugely disproportionate share of miles driven. And that is a particularly difficult piece of the puzzle to impact through parking measures.
Okay, thank you. Mark Ruskell, who I think may be the last questioner. Mark Ruskell, MSP.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, really interesting presentations. And I think from my perspective, it underlines the importance that any revenue that's raised from any of these measures, that there needs to be a really clear focus on ring fencing that revenue to provide alternatives for people, but also like spending that money through a really strong kind of equalities focus. I'm just sort of wondering what your thoughts are on that, if there's any good practice from Paris or around the world where, revenue that's been raised is being spent and it's being directed by those groups who are most disadvantaged, be it people on low income, people with disabilities or whoever. And what what the conclusions of that might be. I mean, is it about providing free travel, free bus travel, public transport for everybody in a city, or are there other measures that are more targeted and more effective at addressing some of those equalities issues that you raised?
Thank you very much. Yeah, really interesting and challenging question. So I guess two pieces. Clearly that we need a lot of this spending to happen before any kind of road pricing system came in. So there's clearly needs to be a significant pot of money put towards supporting alternative modes before road pricing is introduced. Once road pricing is introduced, I completely agree that there needs to be this clear ring fencing of the money to provide other transport benefits and support the lowest income groups. I guess the challenge in terms of comparing this to other places in the world is that this 20% reduction in car miles target is incredibly challenging. That type of change to the transport system hasn't been achieved in 8 years in any other place in the world to date. So we don't have a great body of literature to draw on, and it really will require Scotland to kind of lead the way in terms of new thinking about policy design. And I guess that is another major challenge, along with several others, in terms of delivering all of this.
Okay, that's smashing. I don't see any other hands, so I don't think I've missed anyone. Can I thank everyone for their very interesting questions and contributions? And can I just ask Colin Howden to say something about future meetings?
Yeah, sure. So we intend to have another meeting at the end of March and then another meeting at the end of May. We've just had a discussion just before this meeting that we might look at moving the times of the meetings and the days of the meetings. There's a view that we may get a better MSP attendance if we move that. So I won't give you the dates just in case we change the dates of that. I think they are actually on our website, but maybe ignore them until we change them or confirm what we're doing. The intention, so everybody that's on our email list will receive the invite to the next meetings when they're confirmed. In terms of the themes, we're hoping to look at equalities issues at the next meeting. I see that Professor Adrian Davis was posting on that very topic in the notes and in the chats about he might be a potential speaker for us. And at the final meeting, we're intending to look at logistics impacts. At Transform, we're doing a project at the moment talking to business organizations, and one of the things that comes from them is the business benefits of lower traffic levels, lower car traffic levels in terms of more robust logistics. That might be a topic we'll look at in the final meeting.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Colin. And just to give people a heads up, I had a chat with the deputy conveners of the group. We're thinking of moving to a Tuesday early evening. The advantage for you guys is that we can probably allow a bit longer for a meeting. We're restricted to an hour at lunchtimes because of parliamentary business, so we could probably allow a bit longer, let more people in, and that means I don't have to cut off people like Jane when she's in full flow, which she'll be no doubt pleased about. But so before I finish, I just want to just sort of quickly bring in Mark Ruskell again, because I think, Mark, you had a really good idea for a potential speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I mean, I'm aware that Professor Ian Docherty, his work looking at, how travel patterns have changed really as a result of COVID, is really interesting. And I think also, Professor Docherty has been advising the Scottish Government on future strategy for rail as well. And that certainly provoked some debate, I think. particularly with rail unions and others. So I was thinking that getting Professor Docherty along, I think would be really great value and enable us to have quite a good conversation across different transport modes and perhaps with differing perspectives as well. I think he's got quite a bit to say around demand management as well, so it would help to continue this conversation. So that was my suggestion.
That's really good. Colin, do you want back in on that?
Yeah, Professor Docherty said to me he would be happy to address the group. We had actually asked him for the first 2 meetings at one point, and he just couldn't do these dates, but he said he would be happy to address the group at a later date.
Right, that's fabulous. And of course, by having longer meetings, we can probably have a couple of speakers. So there are advantages always. Okay, we've gone slightly past 2 o'clock, so I shall end it there. Thank you everyone for attending and for having your say, and thank you to Richard for a really interesting presentation and your answers. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye, folks.
Bye.